For what purpose is the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I agree with my friend from Louisiana that it's been a very long day, and unnecessarily one of the members on their side of the aisle called for 22 votes, not because the bills were important and deserved a floor vote, but I guess to continue the agitation privileges of the opposition. I think we should be about doing what is good for the American people, making a difference, trying to solve problems and fix issues where we're able to do so. That's what the American people want to see. They really want to see a working Congress, not one that finds opposition at every turn. And frankly, that's where we are now at 10:10 in the evening. Opposition to anything that is put before you that has any sense of order or problem solving. And that's what this legislation is. It seeks to solve a problem. There are 1.6 million people have cases awaiting action in the immigration court. Those are people seeking to abide by the law, which is what Republicans seem to talk about all the time. That immigrants, migrants, people who are not status or need to address their status are ignoring the law, escaping the law. But there are 1.6 million people that are waiting cases and more to come. The present structure is governed by the executive branch, meaning the immigration courts. The immigration courts can be interfered with politically. They have a procedural mechanism of self-certification. It grants the Attorney General authority to overturn the Board of Immigration Appeals decisions, forcing immigration judges into a struggle to administer timely decisions. That's a broken system. In the courts that I've visited, I see the difficulty in languages. Courts not interested in understanding what the plaintiffs, petitioners are even saying in the court. Indigenous languages not being able to be understood. But a professional executive independent branch would abide by the law, the inconsistencies in jurisdictions as evidence from the east to the west and north to the south. It seems that this is a clear effort to fix and make objective the immigration court system, to do what our friends have been saying over and over again. Let's fix the immigration system in America. But yet, rather than debate this legislation on its merits, whether or not we should have an independent court system for immigration, I have to listen to the redundant and really insensitive and inappropriate attack of what Democrats are trying to do. No election has shown any degree of illegal or unstatused persons voting. That's part of the big lie, part of the insurrection on January 6th that Republicans want to carry into 2022. That's the trigger words. Talk about immigration and we'll get the votes. Beat up on the people who are fleeing and we'll get up on the votes. Well, the southern border that all of you have been to, I've been going to for 20 years plus, not just yesterday or a few months ago or a couple years ago. There are people there from around the world, and they're fleeing persecution, from Haitians to people from Ukraine, people from the Mideast and Africa, people from South and Central America. In fact, the gentlelady from California and myself were there in 2014. We watched babies get off the bus fleeing desperately the gang violence and murder from the Central America. So let's get off of the talking points about what Democrats are trying to do is get false voters or illegal voters. That's not what we're trying to do. We would like to get a voting bill so that we can stop the suppression that has come about through Republican legislatures all across America. That's the only way they can win, and they certainly have been winning because they suppress the votes. But I think this is a reasonable bill to address a problem that should be bipartisan, to establish a professional court system, and this is not to denigrate the hardworking immigration judges across America. I know many of them. But it is to say this bill deserves your attention, not your talking points, and not your banging up on what this country was founded on. And that is people coming from all over the world to help build this country. We are a country of laws, and we're a country of immigrants. I ask my colleagues to support the underlying bill 6577. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose is Mr. Ben seek recognition?
To strike a last word, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I couldn't agree more that we should focus on the facts, and so I have some here that folks may find of interest. The first thing that we should probably talk about is why our Democrat colleagues don't want to talk about the number of people coming across the border and asking for asylum. We've talked generally about it, but no one ever wants to actually talk about the number of folks that are now in the United States. We heard it mentioned obliquely, 1.5 million folks waiting for hearings. Well, I would suggest everybody take a look at Track Immigration, a mounting asylum backlog and growing wait times. It's an interesting article, and it's factual. Without objection, maybe.
Without objection.
Thank you. And I would just point out that what it says is, for those waiting for their asylum application to be heard in an individual hearing, the wait is now 1,751 days, some 58 months, or close to 5 years. Now that's how long it takes to wait for asylum. So the question becomes, what's happening to those who present at the border and state, I have a credible fear? Well, what happens is they're let in. Now, why wasn't that acknowledged immediately by the Secretary of Homeland Security? Because it never was. What he would do every time it came to that point is he would say, we are enforcing the law. He's right. He's enforcing the law when it comes to trying to keep people with drugs and stuff out. He's not doing a good job of it, he's trying. But he didn't say a word about those who are coming across the border by the hundreds of thousands by muttering the magic word, credible fear. And that gets them in under the umbrella of asylum, and then they get in line to wait for 5 years, but never to appear. So, to suggest that the bill we're looking at today is window dressing is an insult to windows. It is not window dressing, it is the distraction from what President Biden really wants to do. Let's go back to the facts. I'm looking at fact sheet. President Biden sends immigration bill to Congress as part of his commitment to modernize our immigration system. Ensuring, I'll just take little pieces of it out, create an earned roadmap to citizenship for undocumented individuals, keep families together, embrace diversity, promote immigrant and refugee integration and citizenship, promote immigrant and refugee integration, grow our economy, protect workers from exploitation. Then it says prioritize smart border controls, not to prevent asylum seekers. In fact, it says to enhance the ability to process asylum seekers. But let's look at the real facts. I have here the budget that this administration has asked for. Now, we've heard repeatedly that not enough money has been put into our system. The implication from the other side of the aisle being that we should put more money into our immigration system. Well, Mr. Chair, I want to ask for this set of budget numbers to be entered into the record without objection.
Without objection.
Thank you. And so I just want to go through this clearly. I raised it, but I was the last one to speak after a 4-hour hearing with the Secretary, so perhaps no one heard me. I'll just say the U.S. Customs and Border Protection budget for fiscal year 20 was $21 billion. That was for fiscal year 2020. Now this year, 2022, you would think, listening to the Democrats, it has gone up. But in point of fact, it's gone down to $16 billion. It's down $4 billion. How odd. Down $4 billion for U.S. Customs and Border Protection. And how about ICE? Gee, in fiscal year 2020, it was $9 billion. What is it in 2022? $8 billion. And so let's go down to Department of Justice Executive Office for Immigration Review. Now we see the truth of the matter. We see that in 2020, it was $673 million. For fiscal year 2022, it's $891, but next year, 2023, $1.4 billion. The thought being, of course, that these new judges will need a lot of them because there's so many millions of folks that have been allowed into the country. And for USCIS, in fiscal year 2020, it was $4.8 billion. For this year, it's $4.7 billion. What I'm trying to say is, folks, if we look at the facts, we will see a continued progression of encouraging more people to present. What's going on is we have mass immigration. Our laws are not established to take care of it. The first step in getting the law cleared up is for people to be truthful and straightforward and transparent and talking about what they're doing. And the Biden administration and these folks here are not. Why would the people of America want to believe anything that's said by this group? Why? And if you're going to get something done in this space, for God's sakes, be straightforward about what you're actually doing. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purposes Mr. Gomez seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. We were told we want to fix the problems, we would support this bill. The truth is, if we want to fix the problem, we would secure the border. You're creating, with this bill, more of a draw into this country. Bad enough you're talking about ending Title 42, which will add hundreds of thousands of people coming. It'll bring them coming quicker. But now we're told, and it really is analogous to, you're going to make the hole bigger in our boat, and we're going to fix it by having more efficient buckets to bail out the situation. It doesn't work that way. This bill will create even more money for the drug cartels to corrupt the government, corrupt local, state, federal government in Mexico. And now I'm finding out from law enforcement in Texas, they're setting up in Texas. We've heard that there's drug cartel employees all over the country. And the Border Patrolmen over the last several years, they say, you know, they call us the logistics. The drug cartels get people across the border, and then the U.S. government ships them to cities all over the country where the drug cartels want them to work so they can finish paying off the money they agreed to pay in order to come into the country illegally. You know, those who want to make this a Marxist totalitarian government, and there are plenty of them in this country, they know that first you destroy a knowledge of history, you create some chaos, and then just as Lenin did, couldn't have done it without Trotsky, but they come riding in and say, we're the answer, we will bring about peace, we'll get this under control. But in the chaos, it normally takes a totalitarian, dictatorial, government in order to overcome the chaos that the Marxists created in order to get control. You know, I'm hearing from people all over the world, have been for some time, we see what you're doing and you're making matters worse in your country, and we're getting desperate because all of us see and we know that when you lose your freedom in America, there will be no place left to go. You're the last place we can count on. And we see the world falling apart, and what are we going to do? We're going to process people more quickly. And I heard from a union leader this morning here in D.C., and he was saying about the northern border that not only are we pulling our border patrolmen away from the southern border just to process people full-time, now we're bringing them from the northern border, and we have hundreds of miles where there is no one, and our enemies know that, and drug cartels know that, and now it won't be long before the northern border is a big problem. Look, when you don't stop the flood but make the hole bigger, we're going to get to the place where it's irreparable and we're going to lose our country. Keep hearing from Democrats, gee, and I'm quoting, the last administration politicized and dismantled our immigration system. Well, they were securing the border, and they were doing so more effectively than anybody since I've been in Congress. The reason Mexico's not a top economy is the corruption from the drug cartels, and America is complicit, and we're complicit in sending the money to Mexico that is bringing drugs in that are killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. I mean, we're seeing this place fall apart, and you want to condemn us for saying, let's secure the border and then we can fix the immigration system. That is the clear solution, and I hope you will join us in eventually coming around to securing the border.
Expired.
Yield back.
For what purpose does Mr. Big seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
I reserve a point of order.
Point of order is reserved.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6577.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have to, I recalled as I was sitting here that a member across the aisle said in a statement and then fled the room, she was the only member to her knowledge of this committee that was born and raised in a border congressional district. And she left before I said, well, wait a second, so was I. I was born and raised in a border congressional district. The district I represent now is not on the border. But I don't go down to the border for photo ops. I go down to the border to talk to friends, ranchers, business people. I go down to the border to talk to my CBP agent friends. I go down to see family that are in that's border congressional district today. And I will tell you something. When I hear that under the previous administration, they weren't doing anything measurable to bring the border under control, I think of this. In Yuma sector, all of 2020, 9,000 encounters. That's the arrest total. That's the apprehension total, 9,000. You want to know what it is for the last 6 months? 200,000 under the policies of this administration. That does not include individuals who are getting away. And Tucson sector has by far, by a factor of at least 3, more getaways than any other sector on the southern border. I think of the 1.2 million people who are illegally in this country who have had process. They've been through the courts. They've been ordered to leave. There's been a removal order, but DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas has told ICE, do not enforce the law, do not remove those individuals. And now I hear, well, there's 1.5 to 1.6 million people in the backlog. I get it. You got a backlog. This bill doesn't cure it, and nor does it secure the border. The amendment I offer today delays the effective date of the bill until all final orders of removal that have been entered by immigration judges prior to the date of enactment have been fully executed. That is to say, those 1.2 million aliens who have final orders, who have received process, they must be removed. The law must be enforced before this bill goes into effect. Before we make a significant change to our immigration courts, we should ensure that orders issued by the courts are executed. Ensuring final orders of removal are actually executed will add to the credibility of the immigration courts. It was Barbara Jordan who said it best when she said, quote, credibility in immigration policy can be summed up in one sentence. Those who should get in, those who should be kept out are kept out, and those who should not be here will be required to leave. For the system to be credible, people actually have to be deported at the end of the process. Let me repeat, for the system to be credible, people actually have to be deported at the end of the process. Delaying the effective date of this bill until final orders for removal that have been entered lawfully by immigration judges are fully executed will add credibility to the system and to the immigration courts. I urge all my colleagues to support this amendment. At our last markup, I offered multiple amendments that were very similar to this amendment. They were all ruled to be germane. If they were germane, then this amendment is also germane. This bill is about immigration courts. My amendment is about the orders issued by immigration courts. Requiring that orders issued by immigration judges be executed is central to the entire immigration court system. In fact, it is essential to this bill. Well, I will tell you, we can talk all we want about who's posturing and who's not posturing. But one thing that we know for certain is the number of people who are coming across the border. The number of encounters in Yuma sector exceed 1,000 a day. Last month when I was in San Diego, 500 a day, with more than 800 Ukrainians coming in and being processed every day in that same border city. In Calexico, it was 350 a day. The most polluted river in the country, in that city, being abused and abusing those people who are coming in illegally. Mr. Chairman, I urge all members to adopt my amendment. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. Does the gentlelady insist on a point of order?
No, Mr. Chairman, I do not. It is germane.
The gentlelady does not insist on her point of order. I recognize the gentlelady for 5 minutes on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would urge disapproval of this amendment, and just some of the arguments that have been advanced here. You know, I've been trying to make progress to bring order to immigration of this country for quite some time. And one of the phenomena that I've run into is you can't do anything until you've done everything. You can't reform the law that might actually put some order into the situation until there's no violation of the law. You can't reform the court system until orders that have been made in the prior system are whatever fully executed. That's not a term in the law, but we have a problem in terms of removal and the administration of the courts. And I was on this committee, very few were. I think Mr. Nadler, myself, and Mr. Shabbat are it, and Sheila, in 1996, when we did some revisions on the Immigration and Nationality Act. Chairman Lamar Smith was chairman of the Immigration Subcommittee, and one of the things we did that was pernicious was to no longer require actual service on a person so that they would have actual knowledge of their immigration hearing. A very large number of the people who have final orders failed to appear, and some unknown percentage of them never knew that they actually had a hearing. I thought at the time that was a big mistake, and it has gummed up the works here. I mean, for God's sakes, if you're going to be evicted from your apartment, you have to actually get notice of the eviction. But when it comes to something like this, it can be mailed to an old address and you never find out. I would note also, you know, some of the statistics that have been advanced here, I think, I'm sure that they're offered in good faith, but they don't give the complete picture. Asylum is part of immigration law. If we want to say that no one can have asylum, we need to change the law. We can't just say we're not going to allow people to try and meet that requirement. I heard one of the speakers say it's just 16% approval, but that doesn't give you the full picture because there's only a 31% denial. So what happened to the rest of the cases? They are administratively, in most cases, closed. And why does that happen? You go into an immigration court and a judge can see that the person before them has a pending application for permanent residence filed by their American citizen spouse. And because we are so jammed up in the USCIS, there's several million applications backlogged, it doesn't make sense to finish the proceedings to remove someone who's the spouse when the application is about to, and there are many other similar types of situations. It also doesn't include the individuals who have already gained compliance. So I do think we need to start by putting order into this system. I know that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle think this is not a good idea. I do. I respect your right to disagree. But we've spent a lot of time to say, how do we get a system that will function, that is orderly, that has due process in the court system? This is an important element. It doesn't answer every problem in the immigration system. That will also take some changes in the immigration law. It will take some changes, I think, in enforcement as well. But you have to start somewhere. We can't continue to say we're not going to do anything that will make this better until we do everything else. And I fear that this amendment falls into that trap, which I have seen now, unfortunately, for several decades, which has added up to no progress whatsoever in the field of immigration. So I would urge our members to oppose this, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition?
I do.
For what purpose does Mr. Bishop seek recognition?
To strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
I have the greatest of respect for the intellect of the gentlelady from California. She's a very smart woman. I, too, have spent a career in law. But I have spent a career in legal systems that, even though there are frustrations associated with them, they basically serve their function. And there is this idea in law of due process. And I can tell you that there are litigants who have encountered the legal system that are never satisfied with how much process is due. We have principles that permeate the law, like claim preclusion. You get one bite at the apple and then it's done. Innumerable rules about when you get, to the point the gentlelady was addressing, the notion about notice calculated to give actual notice so that someone knows about their rights. It's all fine. There are situations in which it doesn't apply exactly the same. These are people crossing the border. These are not American citizens engaged in enforcing exactly the same quantum of rights. They're crossing an international border. It works a little differently. And I mean, with all due respect, what you are describing, having sat here since 1996, and you can't even concede that someone who has been given an order, a final order, actually, I thought the notion you said that the term fully executing an order of removal is not a term in the law. I certainly know what it means to execute an order. So in common parlance, it's there. This is the entire nature of the problem, and every time I step another step closer, like we had the other several weeks ago, when I was being told that there was something already provided for in the law to prevent China from capitalizing on the visa waiver program that you wanted to put through, and you could read the law in 2 seconds and see that it wasn't true what was being said. So people have bogged down and tied themselves in a Gordian knot, and that's exactly what the big picture is there's been, I don't need to question everybody's motives. Obviously, some people function in good faith. Many do not. But they're highly intelligent, highly skilled, thoughtful people who have tied this thing in one big Gordian knot. And so to the point of the amendment, which says, let's not recreate the wheel. Let's not build an entirely new court system to adjudicate these issues, immigrant by immigrant, if you're not prepared to act on the final orders for removal. And I don't think it is a question. I don't really concede that it is an apt description to say you're not going to do anything until you fix everything. No, let's start with the people who've had the process the law provides for. And if you want to say going forward you think the process should be more fulsome, then we can argue about that in time. But if you can't do that, what indeed is the point? Why is it, what what benefit does it afford to the American people to have more and more money expended for people coming in through for a processing to get their name on a list and check them off and hand them the paper and put them on an airplane to go somewhere? Just get the American servants out of the way. Just eliminate them because they're not serving a purpose. If you're not going to ever have the law vindicated. So it makes all the sense in the world. I mean, I think it's the ultimate acid test. If the answer is no, we're not going to remove one person who has been through such process as the law affords, as it now exists, person having been ordered removed, we're not going to remove one of them, then indeed, we're wasting our time. The entire system is a waste. The resources plunged into it and increasing all the time are a waste. There's no point at all. So it just makes all the sense in the world. I'd yield to the gentleman from Arizona if he's got anything else to say.
Yes, I thank the gentleman for yielding. So if we're not going to remove people before we change the judicial system here, how about if we just said we'll gain operational control as in accordance and required under the Secure Fence Act? How about that? Oh, no, they don't have it. Or if we can't do that, how about we're going to just do Title VIII detentions? And we're going to enforce that law that already exists. Why can't we enforce these laws before we make a change in the judicial system?
Ms. Escobar?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
It is really tragic that this committee can't even have a conversation about making the judicial system more fair and efficient. I truly do wish we could have a discussion in good faith. I truly do wish we could sit down and talk through all of the various avenues that we need to work on together in a bipartisan manner in order to address what everybody recognizes is an enormous challenge. But it seems like we can't have any conversation about immigration, and in fact, even non-immigration topics, without most of my Republican colleagues trotting out the great replacement theory or theories about Democrats wanting to import voters. To repeat something that I have said before, and I will keep saying it because it's true, even though it irritates one of my colleagues, I live on the border. I'm the only member of this committee who is a third-generation border resident, born, raised, lived my whole life, raised my children on the border, my fourth-generation children. No one wants a safe and well-managed border more than those of us who live there. We have the greatest stake in it, far more than any of you do. For decades, we have tried it your way. Republicans have told us for decades, we can't reform our laws until we, quote unquote, secure the border. So we've done it your way. In fact, we've not opened up any new legal pathways. We've instead eliminated or limited them. We've not opened up borders, and I have yet to meet a single person on my journey in life who wants an open border. Instead, we have built hundreds of miles of walls and barriers. We've doubled, even tripled personnel and equipment. We've hardened the border to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. Today, we still have Trump-era policies in place. Title 42, the Trump-era policy that is being heralded as a favored policy by my Republican colleagues, it's still in place today. I suspect they love it because it distorts and inflates the numbers. And just as a reminder, when one individual presents him or herself at the border more than once, if he or she presents him or herself 12 times, that one individual is documented as 12 individuals. So it's no wonder that some of my colleagues want to keep that policy in place. It inflates the numbers. The numbers of people arriving at the border, and I lived it, I saw it every single day, they were high even during the most cruel and horrific administration in American history, the administration that separated children from their mamas. None of this has worked. No one on this committee has spent more time on the border than I have. No one on this committee has spent more time talking to both migrants and personnel than I have. And I will tell you this, which you may not want to hear. The more that we limit legal pathways, which is what we've done for the last 30 years, the more that we incentivize irregular migration. So that's what we've done. We've incentivized the current situation by refusing to legislate. And because people have been funneled into only one avenue, asking for asylum, even if they don't qualify, immigration judges are overloaded. And a news flash for some of you. Immigration judges frequently rule against those who are seeking asylum, and those folks get deported. But based on today's conversation, it seems Republicans are against making that process more efficient too. Let that sink in. Again, unfortunately, I can't help but to believe that most of my Republican colleagues love the status quo. They're fighting to preserve it. It works for them. It keeps their voters angry. It keeps our country divided, and it works for their elections. The fact is that judicial independence will help make courts more efficient. But that's just one part of the solution. We have to have an orderly system that increases legal pathways, especially those that are advantageous to us. I hear from American business organizations on a regular basis about the need for more visas for immigration reform.
The time of the gentlelady has
help them and their workers. It's time we legislate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Who seeks recognition? Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
We have one pending.
Oh, sorry. All right, yeah, okay. Well, then strike the last word.
Gentleman
I'm
is
anxious to get
recognized.
out of here tonight, but I do what. Oh, Mr. Bishop says no. Take your time. All right, then I will. Let me respond to what Ms. Escobar said. I'm really stunned. We were sitting here. Part of the reason I'm distracted is because I was in disbelief at what my friend was suggesting here. Apparently, what did she say, Mr. Bishop? She said we're in love with the status quo. I mean, what? I don't. This is bizarro world. Earlier, we were accused of jumping up and down and screaming because we hate the status quo, and now you say we're delighted with it. I don't understand. Listen, let me just correct one thing you said. You just claimed that the numbers of border crossings are about to decline over the next several months. Listen, we didn't come up with these numbers. This is DHS. The Department of Homeland Security is the one that testified before us and told us right here and has been saying publicly the estimate is about to grow to 18,000 a day, 18,000 illegal encounters a day crossing over that border with the repeal of Title 42. I don't know. I mean, I know you live on the border. I don't, maybe the view is skewed that closely, but I'm telling you what we're seeing. I'm telling you what we're being told here under oath, and I'm telling you what everybody can see with their own eyes if they turn on television. We don't have a border. It's totally overrun. And the point is, and what we're so frustrated about, is that this looks intentional. There's no other explanation for it. And I said that to Secretary Mayorkas when he was here. Many of us have called him out. I told him he needs to begin looking for another career field because we're going to take the majority in November, and he's going to be impeached. And so he needs to get ready for it, and the reason he is going to be is because it's an absolute, total, willing dereliction of duty and a violation of our federal laws, defiant as he is. And he was not truthful under oath, as we now know. It's crazy. It's crazy. Ms. Escobar, I do not know what reality you're looking at, but it is not the same one that we are. All due respect, I know you're closest to the border and you're fourth generation and all that, but we are deeply concerned about the lack of security. Yield to Mr. Biggs.
Thanks. I thank you for yielding. You know, I do find it interesting. Yes, if you live in El Paso and you have triple fencing and multiple canals, yeah, you got a lot more border security and border control than if you live, I don't know, near the Tohono O'odham Reservation that has 62 linear miles with nothing more than a 4-strand barbed wire and Normandy fencing.
Would the gentleman yield?
And I can tell you this. There are places, if you go to the Cocopah Reservation, 8 miles, Normandy barrier. Wide open. I've walked literally right underneath that Normandy barrier on the Tohono O'odham Reservation. And I can tell you, because the wash is big and it's wide, I don't have to duck. You could be 6 foot, you could be as tall as Burgess Owens. You're not going to have to
Would the
duck
gentleman yield?
walking through.
No, we're
I'm
not
going to
yielding yet.
yield.
We're not going to yield. We're not going to yield.
So here's the deal. You could talk about where you live and the security that you feel. But in Yuma, Arizona, where you have 1,000 encounters a day, and you've got fencing by the Morelos Dam that is wide open, where cartels drop you off after you've flown in from Cancun from one of 100 countries this year alone. And you fly into Cancun or Mexico City and then on up to Mexicali. And you either Uber or the cartel drives you in a bus over to Algodones. And I can stand and watch you get delivered. You get down and you walk down the wash and you walk across the Morelos Dam. And you come in. And you may be from Uzbekistan or Haiti or any one of 100 countries. We don't have translators for these people. We don't. We try to our agents, the CBP tries to track down translators for them. In the facility that they've had to build in Yuma, it's designed for 825, but under COVID can only hold about 350. When I was there just a couple weeks ago, over 3,000 people in there. I don't know what your reality is.
Mr. Biggs.
But I know what my reality is. Now,
Let me just say, you're exactly right. That's Arizona. We've all been to the Rio Grande Valley, which is Grand Central for all this, at the epicenter. And I mean, I stood there at 1:30 in the morning, watched droves of people just walking open. There is no barrier at all. There's no barrier at all in the Rio Grande Valley. They just walk straight across, saw it with my own eyes.
The gentleman yield just for a question,
yes.
or just to pose a rhetorical question, and I don't know how it can get communicated, but is the perspective of the opposition that this is all just fine?
I think that's what she said. I think that's what she said.
So Bishop Evans, was that just, tough
Time of the
talk?
gentleman
back.
has expired. Who seeks recognition? Otherwise, the question occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The noes have it. And the amendment is not agreed to. Recorded vote is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
No.
Mr. Nadler votes no. Ms. Lofgren?
No.
Ms. Lofgren votes no. Ms. Jackson-Lee? Ms. Jackson-Lee votes no. Mr. Cohen?
No.
Mr. Cohen votes no. Mr. Johnson of Georgia?
No.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes no. Mr. Deutsch?
No.
Mr. Deutsch votes no. Ms. Bass?
Bass votes no.
Ms. Bass votes no. Mr. Jeffries?
No.
Mr. Jeffries votes no. Mr. Cicilline?
No.
Mr. Cicilline votes no. Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Mr. Raskin?
No.
Mr. Raskin votes no. Ms. Jayapal?
No.
Ms. Jayapal votes no. Ms. Stimmings?
No.
Ms. Stimmings votes no. Mr. Correa?
No.
Mr. Correa votes no. Ms. Scanlon?
No.
Ms. Scanlon votes no. Ms. Garcia?
No.
Ms. Garcia votes no. Mr. Neguse?
No.
Mr. Neguse votes no. Ms. McBath?
No.
Ms. McBath votes no. Mr. Stanton?
No.
Mr. Stanton votes no. Ms. Dean?
No.
Ms. Dean votes no. Ms. Escobar?
No.
Ms. Escobar votes no. Mr. Jones?
No.
Mr. Jones votes no. Ms. Ross?
Ross votes no.
Ms. Ross votes no. Ms. Bush?
Bush votes no.
Ms. Bush votes no. Mr. Jordan? Mr. Shabbat?
Aye.
Mr. Shabbat votes aye. Mr. Gomert? Aye. Mr. Gomert votes aye. Mr. Isa? Mr. Buck?
No, I said aye.
Mr. Isa votes aye. Mr. Buck? Mr. Gates? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana? Aye. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes aye. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes aye. Mr. Stube? Mr. Tiffany?
Tiffany, aye.
Mr. Tiffany votes aye. Mr. Massey? Mr. Roy? Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes aye. Ms. Fishbach?
Aye.
Ms. Fishbach votes aye. Ms. Sparts? Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Benz? Mr. Benz votes aye. Mr. Owens? Mr. Owens votes aye.
Are there any members who wish to be recorded who haven't been recorded? Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 11 ayes and 23 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to. For what purpose does Mr. Biggs seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
I reserve a point of order.
Point of order is reserved.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6577, offered by Mr. Biggs of Arizona, page 35, beginning
Without
on...
objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment ensures that current law regarding certain parts of immigration judge jurisdiction does not change. The amendment clarifies that immigration judges retain original jurisdiction of any application stemming from any outcome of a credible fear determination, positive or negative, made by an asylum officer, as is presently the case, as a matter of law and regulation. Currently, when an alien receives a positive credible fear determination, the alien files an asylum application with the court for further consideration by an immigration judge. If an alien is found to not have a credible fear of persecution, the alien may seek review of that determination from an immigration judge. The Biden administration is attempting, through an interim final rule, to upend the credible fear process by providing asylum officers the ability to interview and grant asylum to those found to have a credible fear of persecution in a non-adversarial setting where only the alien's statements and evidence will come into the record. The process eliminates the role of the ICE trial attorney who acts as the prosecutor in immigration court. The trial attorney can present evidence of fraud, contradictory reports on country conditions, and government witnesses. The process also removes the immigration judge, the neutral arbiter of facts, from the process. When the Homeland Security Act of 2002 was enacted, all functions not transferred to the new Department of Homeland Security that were previously exercised by the Executive Office for Immigration Review would continue to be exercised by the Executive Office of Immigration Review. This includes the consideration of asylum applications by those who had previously received a positive credible fear determination. This amendment ensures that the congressional intent of the Homeland Security Act is met with unambiguous statutory language to prevent the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security from removing the immigration judges and the adversarial process from the asylum system as it relates to credible fear. Putting aside the concerns that this raises on the increased strain that this scheme would cause on the administration of the legal immigration system and those who truly merit protection, this interim final rule is a thinly veiled effort to process more aliens into the United States and permit them access to valuable work authorization far faster than under the current regulatory regime. The rule will entice more aliens to make the dangerous journey north, provide no mechanism to detect or address fraud in the asylum process, and empower cartels to further gain control of our southern border. Mr. Chairman, I urge the adoption of this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentlelady insist on a point of order?
No, Mr. Chairman, the amendment is germane.
The gentlelady does not insist on her point of order. The gentlelady is recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge opposition to this amendment. The amendment really undermines one of the key purposes of the bill, which is to create a more efficient immigration system. Now, a lot of people have expressed, and I think rightly so, concerns about processing at the southern border and long delays in asylum adjudication. Under the current system, migrants who express a credible fear of persecution at the border must argue their claim in immigration court. So it's really not that much of a surprise that we create years-long backlogs in the immigration court system. The Biden administration's rule has authorized asylum officers to process migrants at our southern border rather than placing them directly into the immigration court backlog. Now, asylum officers are a specialized corps of officers within the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. They have been trained to process affirmative asylum and credible fear claims. The rule allowing these specialized officers to adjudicate asylum claims at the border will speed up processing of meritorious claims and create a record for review at the immigration court. This is also, we believe, likely to reduce the number of claims that go into the immigration court backlog. Now, this new rule is a key step to shortening processing times and chipping away at the immigration court backlog. We, all of us on both sides of the aisle, should support it. I don't think this amendment, which would really just serve to exacerbate the backlog, should be supported. It would just perpetuate a broken system. I think it's important that we understand that asylum is part of our current immigration law. And it's important that claims of asylum be processed promptly and efficiently. People have complained, and I think it's correct, that these cases that go on for years and years and years and people are waiting for their cases, that's not the way we should have this. People should have their claims heard. If they're successful, they're successful. If they're not successful, then they have to leave. Letting this drag on for years at a time is not the right approach. Unfortunately, this amendment would perpetuate the status quo, and I think that is the complete opposite of what we have been trying to do here. I would also note that although we have focused on the asylees in some cases from Central America, it's true that we're now seeing Ukrainians who are fleeing, well, a catastrophe in Ukraine, also at the southern border. Most recently, as you know, the president has indicated new processes will be put in place in embassies around the world. It is not a good thing to add to that disorder at the southern border. So let me just say that I think, although I'm, I guess I don't want to speculate what the motivation is, that the author speaks for himself. But I will just say that for those of us who've expressed concern about delays in the processing, and those delays I think are to be avoided, this amendment actually does nothing to solve it. In fact, it preserves the status quo. And we've all agreed that the status quo is not acceptable, and therefore I would hope that we would oppose this amendment, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does Mr. Bishop seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
There is a curious inconsistency. Whenever you can speed something up, the result being that the person's likelier to get into the country, you're for that. But whenever the process would go the other direction, they're likely to be exported, you want more process. You talk about, the system is an adversarial justice system. When you let asylum officers review and make determinations on credible fear, you're taking away the adversary. You're taking away the person who might oppose that. The result being facilitated, and you say, that's how you want to speed it up. You're going to speed it up where the likeliest result is going to be, in every case, waving them in. That's very curious. If the problem is inadequate process, how do you reduce the process and have the right result obtained? Who wants some time? Mr. Biggs, I yield.
I apologize. Thank you for yielding. I just want to make a couple of quick points because I know it's late and everybody's tired and some feel like we've beaten this horse relentlessly. I would just point out something that's very important on this. This bill has been represented as being merely a change into the court system, but it's more than that. You're actually changing the asylum system because you're changing jurisdictional issues. So what this bill does is by eliminating the adversary process, you're eliminating something that is vital to adjudicating asylum cases. And you're missing your prosecutor, you're changing your judge. But what my amendment does, it keeps the jurisdiction the same. And that's what's so important here. And I have to make something very clear. No one here is saying asylum is not a critical component of our immigration process. We recognize that. But by the same token, you shouldn't emasculate the system, the adversarial system that we have, in the name of trying to facilitate and move people through the system faster. And I'll just say one last thing, and I appreciate the gentlelady, because I know she's worked on these issues for years, and I think we've seen something like this, similar to this, in Judiciary Committee before. I appreciate her saying if an individual does not qualify under asylum, they must be removed. I appreciate her saying that because I think, as Barbara Jordan said, that has to happen. They need to be removed. Now, having said that, you got a 1.2 million that Secretary Mayorkas is refusing to remove. So with that, I'm going to yield back to the gentleman from North Carolina. Thank you.
I yield to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Bentz.
Thank you for the yield. The reason this is so frustrating is because this bill is a little bitty bite of a great, big, huge problem. And no one on the other side of the aisle seems to want to admit how huge this problem is. But the American people need to be told that our systems are not prepared to handle the millions of people that are coming in and waiting for these hearings. So instead of focusing on what we're going to do for our schools, for our hospitals, literally, I had people in my office today saying the folks from Ukraine are running through the systems. The folks from Afghanistan, we have already apparently put that debacle behind us, but we haven't. Those folks are here. So now we come in and see this little bitty effort to do something. It's just sad. It's sad. We have this huge problem and people are ignoring it. I yield back.
Everybody's got their eyes averted. I guess I'll yield back the remaining 49 seconds.
The gentleman yields back. Does any other member seek recognition?
Madam Chairman.
Ms. Jackson-Lee?
Since we're going down,
The gentlelady strikes the last word.
strike the last word. Since we're going down memory lane, I don't think any of the members were here when there was a multitude of efforts to have a comprehensive approach to immigration reform. Just very briefly, one most notably was the Gang of Eight, bipartisan, touched on every aspect of immigration reform, and would have, at the time, I think it was at least a decade ago, put us in a position where we would have been able to respond to backlogs. We would have dealt with visa HB1s, ag, even though we've done some great work on that recently. but it was a comprehensive legislative initiative. And it was addressing the question of the Dreamers, of which we still have not basically addressed. But every turn was rejected by our friends on the other side of the aisle. So it looks like you're extending your hand of friendship, that you want a big picture view of this. And I'd only ask the question, when that is offered, will there be partners to get this done? And the law, as has indicated, requires the appropriate review of the credible, fair request for asylum. I don't know how we can undermine that to attempt to eliminate the immigration or the migration that is going on. We've tried to do the large picture. We didn't have a partner to do it. Maybe we'll do it this time, since that's what you've been talking about for the last hours. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Do further members wish to be recognized? Hearing no one, the question then occurs on the amendment. All those who are in favor will say aye. All those who are opposed will say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
No.
A roll call has been requested. The clerk will please call the roll.
Mr. Nadler. Ms. Lofgren.
No.
Ms. Lofgren votes no. Ms. Jackson-Lee. Ms. Jackson-Lee votes no. Mr. Cohen.
No.
Mr. Cohen votes no. Mr. Johnson of Georgia.
No.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes no. Mr. Deutsch. Ms. Bass.
Bass votes no.
Ms. Bass votes no. Mr. Jeffries.
No.
Mr. Jeffries votes no. Mr. Cicilline.
No.
Mr. Cicilline votes no. Mr. Swalwell. Mr. Liu. Mr. Raskin.
Lou votes no.
Mr. Liu votes no. Ms. Stimmings, or sorry, Ms. Jayapal.
Jayapal votes no.
Ms. Jayapal votes no. Ms. Stimmings.
No.
Ms. Stimmings votes no. Mr. Correa. Ms. Scanlon.
Scanlon votes no.
Ms. Scanlon votes no. Ms. Garcia.
No.
Ms. Garcia votes no. Mr. Neguse.
No.
Mr. Neguse votes no. Ms. McBath.
No.
Ms. McBath votes no. Mr. Stanton.
No.
Mr. Stanton votes no. Ms. Dean.
No.
Ms. Dean votes no. Ms. Escobar.
No.
Ms. Escobar votes no. Mr. Jones. Ms. Ross.
Ross votes no.
Ms. Ross votes no. Ms. Bush.
Bush votes no.
Ms. Bush votes no. Mr. Jordan. Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Shabbat.
Aye.
Mr. Shabbat votes aye. Mr. Gomert. Mr. Gomert votes aye. Mr. Issa.
Aye.
Mr. Issa votes aye. Mr. Buck. Mr. Gates. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes aye. Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. McClintock. Mr. McClintock votes aye. Mr. Stube. Mr. Tiffany.
Tiffany, aye.
Mr. Tiffany votes aye. Mr. Massey. Mr. Roy. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop votes aye. Ms. Fishbach.
Aye.
Ms. Fishbach votes aye. Ms. Sparts. Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Benz? Mr. Benz votes aye. Mr. Owens? Mr. Owens votes aye.
Are there other, Mr. Nadler?
Mr. Nadler? Mr. Nadler votes no.
Howard Swalwell.
Mr. Swalwell, you are not recorded.
No.
Mr. Swalwell votes no.
Ms. Correa recorded?
Mr. Correa, you are not recorded.
Correa votes no.
Mr. Correa votes no.
How am I recorded? Mr. Deutsch.
Mr. Deutsch, you are not recorded.
No.
Mr. Deutsch votes no.
Are there other members who wish to vote or who wish to change their vote? If not, the clerk will please report.
Ms. Chairwoman, there are 12 ayes and 23 noes.
The amendment is not adopted. Does any member wish to be heard? Are there any additional amendments? Mr. Johnson, for what purpose do you wish to be recognized?
I have an amendment at the desk. Should be the last one of the day.
The gentleman has an amendment, and Ms. Jackson-Lee reserves a point of order.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6577, offered by Mr. Johnson of Louisiana. Add at the end of the bill the following: Section 10, effective date. This act and the amendments made by this act shall not take effect until the Secretary of Homeland Security certifies to Congress that the performance of all contracts awarded by the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense between January 20th, 2017 and January 20th, 2021 for the construction of a barrier along the international border between the United States and Mexico has been completed.
The gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This has been a long
Withdraw my
day.
point of order.
He gets to explain his amendment first, and then we will go to the gentlelady.
It's been a long day. It's been a long day. We've had a lot of discussion. There's been some obfuscation of the facts, I'm afraid, here in the last 30 minutes. So let me just give a quick summary of some indisputable facts, because it will lead into the purpose of the amendment, and then we can do this and we can all go home. The Biden administration is actively eliminating almost every tool that our country has to secure our southern border in the face of the worst border crisis in American history. Full stop. That's a fact. On his first day in office, President Biden halted construction of the border wall. In the first 6 months of the Biden administration, the president spent roughly $2 billion, which is approximately 20% of what Trump allocated to build the wall, but he did it to pay military contractors to guard unused materials. So that's roughly $3 million per day to guard steel, concrete, and other materials in the desert. And we've all seen it. It's all eroding now in the weeds. Biden's new fiscal year 2023 budget proposes cutting border security funding. He's ending Title 42. The DHS Office of Intelligence anticipates as many as 1 million immigrants could cross the southern border in the first 6 weeks after rescinding Title 42. He's fighting to end remain in Mexico at the Supreme Court and not properly following appellate court orders to keep it intact. He's giving the U.S. CIS officials the authority to grant asylum to migrants who cross the border without an immigration court judge reviewing that claim, an egregious and unlawful expansion of the Department of Homeland Security's authority. He's limiting ICE's immigration enforcement activities, and under President Biden, ICE has arrested 48% fewer convicted criminals, deported 63% fewer criminals, and ICE agents are averaging fewer than 1 arrest per month. That's right, 1 arrest per month. In March 2022, DHS released 80,000 illegal aliens into the interior. The total number of illegal aliens released during the Biden administration is over 800,000. Less than 2 weeks ago, Secretary Mayorkas sat right there. He testified under oath that the border is secure, and everybody knows that it is not. And he also said, in response to Mr. Jordan's repeated questions, he finally was required to admit he doesn't really know who those 42 known terrorists are, by the way. He's not really sure. He's just the secretary of the agency. It would be comical if it were not so crazy and dangerous. So here's my amendment, guys, as we end the day here. And I mean, this is just common sense, but we ought to require All of the border wall contracts that were entered into during the Trump administration be fully completed before the provisions of this bill go into effect. I urge my colleagues to support this so we can all go home triumphantly and believe that we actually did something good in this administration for the border. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and the gentlelady does not
I'm
insist on
not
it.
pursuing and insisting on my point of order.
Gentlelady
Withdraw it at this time.
withdraws her point of order, and I recognize myself to strike the last word. We have agreed that all of the amendments to the effective date are going to be considered germane to this bill, and I think that's the proper and appropriate ruling. I would note, however, that the border construction is really not within the jurisdiction of this committee. It's within the jurisdiction of the Homeland Security Committee. Just a note. I would further note that we don't know if this were to go into effect. This could be many decades later. And here's one of the phenomena that we have seen. We supported the Secure Fence Act. I think that was 2006. Some of those contracts have yet to be completed because the need in Texas has been for eminent domain to take the private property of individuals all along the border, and that has been litigated. And so this could, I have no idea when that litigation will end, but the implementation of this bill could be postponed for a substantial period of time. I would note also that having the court system work better is beneficial for the entire system, and delaying it for some unknown period of time would undermine really the entire rationale for proceeding with this bill at this time. I know it's late. When you said this is the last amendment, I saw smiles go on the faces of members on both sides of the aisle, so I won't go on at a tremendous length. I'll just lay out my opposition, and I will yield back the time. Do other members wish to be heard on this amendment? If not, then the question occurs on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment will say aye. All opposed will say no. No.
No.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. And we will now, unless there's a request, and there appears not to be, move to the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those who are in favor will respond by saying aye. Aye. All those who are opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. This is just the amendment in the nature of a substitute. The bill itself will now be before the committee. All those in favor of the bill as amended will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and a roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
Yes.
Mr. Nadler votes yes. Ms. Lofgren?
Aye.
Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson-Lee? Ms. Jackson-Lee votes aye. Mr. Cohen?
Aye.
Mr. Cohen votes aye. Mr. Johnson of Georgia?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes aye. Mr. Deutsch?
Aye.
Mr. Deutsch votes aye. Ms. Bass?
Aye.
Ms. Bass votes aye. Mr. Jeffries?
Aye.
Mr. Jeffries votes aye. Mr. Cicilline?
Aye.
Mr. Cicilline votes aye. Mr. Swalwell?
Aye.
Mr. Swalwell votes aye. Mr. Liu?
Aye.
Mr. Liu votes aye. Mr. Raskin?
Hold on, Chair.
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Ms. Jayapal?
Aye.
Ms. Jayapal votes aye. Ms. Stimmings?
Aye.
Ms. Stimmings votes aye. Mr. Correa?
Aye.
Mr. Correa votes aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Ms. Garcia?
Aye.
Ms. Garcia votes aye. Mr. Neguse?
Aye.
Mr. Neguse votes aye. Ms. McBath?
Aye.
Ms. McBath votes aye. Mr. Stanton?
Aye.
Mr. Stanton votes aye. Ms. Dean?
Aye.
Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar?
Aye.
Ms. Escobar votes aye. Mr. Jones? Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross?
Ross votes aye.
Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush?
Bush votes aye.
Ms. Bush votes aye. Mr. Jordan? Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Shabbat?
No.
Mr. Shabbat votes no. Mr. Gomert? Mr. Gomert votes no. Mr. Issa?
No.
Mr. Issa votes no. Mr. Buck? Mr. Gates? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana?
No.
Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes no. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Stube? Mr. Tiffany?
Tiffany, no.
Mr. Tiffany votes no. Mr. Massey? Mr. Roy? Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Fishbach?
No.
Ms. Fishbach votes no. Ms. Sparts? Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Benz? Mr. Benz votes no. Mr. Owens? Mr. Owens votes no.
Mr. Garcia, Ms. Garcia?
Yes, Mr. Chairman?
Are there any members who have who wish to be recorded who have not been recorded? Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 24 ayes and 12 noes.
The ayes have it. The bill is amended, is ordered reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. Without objection, the bill will be reported as a single amendment in nature of a substitute incorporating all adopted amendments. The staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. This concludes our business for today. Thanks to all of our members for attending. Without objection, the markup is adjourned.